Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review, much more so react, because reasonably I'm just kind of going into the guessing game within this episode, and then ultimately revealing who had gone home by the end of this said episode. Letting you know who had been unmasked during fact. So ultimately, if you do not want to know spoilers or anything like that, definitely go on Hulu right to the second of this recording and recap yourself of the very first episode of The Masked Singer, season 4, episode 1. So yeah, we're gonna talk about Group A, and ultimately, I'm gonna mostly just kind of talk about how I felt about some of the performances. Not actually mention exactly which song they sang or whatever, but ultimately, I'm gonna go into how I felt about the performances, and ultimately how I kind of have been thinking, okay, maybe this person is said this person. So we're going to be playing the, as per usual, the Masked Singer guessing game. If you think that you have a better idea who any number of Group A is, I don't really like any of the other groups and any of the other characters. I'm sure there probably were really great clues and stuff like that. And but ultimately, I'm just kind of I want to keep it kind of bottled into really just like this first episode, and then anything after that is just kind of like, oh well, that's icing on top of the cake. But really, it's just people might already have consensuses of who everyone is on this entire show already, via numerous clues or stuff like that that has been dropped somewhere. But hey, if people within Group A, within this first episode, if you have any better guesses than what I have guesses of dropping down, then by all means, let me know in the comments below. If anything, your guess might be better than mine, or yeah, some people might have felt the same. So, let's ultimately pause here and let's ultimately talk about, in order of performances, ultimately how who I felt was the person that did sing, and ultimately who I thought was the person that sang um, the guessing game. Yeah, yeah. Anyways, so ultimately, letting people know, spoilers now, um, not who actually got unmasked, but who was uh, the mascotted person by name of mascotted person who had gone home tonight. So again, people can feel spoiled free till honestly the very end of this episode. I'll give you a double five time count, and we'll go into spoilers by the end of this episode. So the dragon ultimately had gone home tonight, and so ultimately, luckily, we had four other, well, technically, if you count the snow owls as two, which I guess you have to. Um, I had gotten five free guesses tonight, which was great, to ultimately lead me to the next episode. Ultimately, you're going to see by the end of the episode if I had gotten the dragon correctly via my guesses. Ultimately, some people might have assumed, like, yeah, you're cheating. Like, yeah, you watched the episode and then edited later and said, yeah, I win again. Why would I go through that whole rigmarole? It seems like a pointless endeavor. Um, because it's just a show. I could be wrong. It's okay if I'm wrong. Um, like I guess I could live stream guess, but like I'm not watching the show live. I'm not watching the like. I usually like watch the show like recapping on Hulu and like at 2 in the morning. To live stream that would seem very absurd. like I could probably possibly do a live stream watch along, but again, I think visuals tend to help a lot more, and I don't think I could do that via YouTube of providing a watch along visual, because I'm sure it would get claimed or something along those lines. So let's go and start guessing. So ultimately, let's pause here and let's guess away. Kind of a little tiny bit of different kind of sets up for these kinds of things. But yeah, Ultimate the Sun had been the very first performance that had been gone on tonight. Pretty good opener, pretty good sounding performance going on. Reasonably, I had gotten some clues that ultimately gave us a very much Disney logo that we might be fairly familiar with, a mouse-ish looking logo, and reasonably that's all that kind of obtained in my mind, because ultimately everything else was just kind of all like randomly scatterbrained, or there was just a lot of Disney-esque like references. There was like Frozens and all these other kind of things to, I think, throw people off some paths. There was some kind of solar system like thing going on, and ultimately people could have any kind of conclusions that this just might be some other different kind of person that I assumed that this is. Ultimately, I just naturally quasi assumed that this character is Christina Aguilera, because ultimately sound alone. But ultimately, when seeing Christina Aguilera at some point performing, I would see her do a lot of the stuff that this Sun character was doing. A lot of weird, bizarre pointing up to the sky, or a lot of, let's just say, for PG terms, she was frequently doing the shaking of the chest, which ultimately I had seen Christina do bizarrely, like I was watching for it. No, I remember her quasi doing that at some points in some performances and stuff along those lines. Um, Ultimately, when watching her go and do, I think the New Year's Rockin' Eve performance, I think you can kind of taper that back to kind of her more recent like televised Ash like performance. But if anything, you can kind of hear the kind of up and down register things that Aguilera is known for. Recently, Aguilera had been back into the studio cranking out another song for the live action Mulan. So I'm like, okay, all right. So, if anything, she is currently retying herself to Disney with Mulan. So I figured maybe her being on The Masked Singer was really tied to, well, she currently did Mulan. So why not have an easy way to promote the Disney Plus Mulan movie by having Christina Aguilera on said Masked Singer to promote Mulan being on Disney Plus. So that's who I assume is the Sun. A lot of people could have different consensuses. A lot of people could be like, no, that's definitely not Christina Aguilera, not the body type, or dot. Whatever you have to say, go out of your way to guess who the Sun is. Let me know in the comments below if you think it's somebody different, or ultimately there might be some kind of no. Clearly, the clues are saying it's this person. So at the end of the day, let's move on. The giraffe. The giraffe, I don't know, the kind of like the giraffe's performance was kind of a soft serve for me. Like it was ultimately just like was this character quite singing? Not quite sure. Ultimately we have heard plenty of times Christine Aguilera being ultimately dubbed or teed up to be on the show at some point, and so that's why I kind of assumed it was Christine Aguilera. AJ McLean ultimately had numerous times been guest to be on the show, quite frequent enough. So I had assumed that the giraffe was AJ McLean because ultimately, from what I remember, AJ had done a show called Static Shock, a cartoon, and we had ultimately known that he is a uh, like he has like a record label that ultimately signs artists. Seemingly, most artists are mostly rapper artists, so maybe that is some kind of clue to the whole rapper thing. And I don't know what else AJ does. I don't know if he's a race car driver or whatever. But at the end of the day, maybe a lot of clues coming down the pipeline of some of the stuff that he um, has done through any number of portions of time could tell us more things. Maybe if we're gonna get a zombie movie clue that could ultimately tell us that it's AJ because ultimately he had done a zombie movie at some point. So AJ, that's kind of the sound, and that's kind of the way that I kind of went into ultimately AJ, of course, from the Backstreet Boys. If you don't already know, because I've probably said that plenty of other seasons of like, hey, this might be AJ. So, anyways, yeah, that's who I'm thinking of who it is currently. I know there might be a lot of people with a variety of different guesses, or they could narrow it down easily that this could be some race car driver or some other kind of person, because it seemed like this one they tried to make it as vague as possible, but then again they like I think for these clues, I think they're kind of like I don't think they're completely throwing a giant wrench to the point of like the clues being a waste of time to listen to anymore. I think these clues might actually seem to be actually reasonable this season instead of being severely unreasonable, where they've like, dude, there's no way any of these clues is gonna make me care about like, come on, like you got to do something better with these clues, and I think they have done something relatively better this season. Yeah. So AJ, quasi kind of soft serve performance, but at the end of the day, let's go out of our way to move on. The pop of corn, popcorn. So basically, Jenny McCarthy had mentioned that ultimately she had seen the Proud Mary kind of uh, logo in the background of the clues, and I had picked that up as well. Ultimately, reasonably, when going into this, I was like, you know what? Again, the last two, and now this character, Tina Turner had been named numerous times to being on the show. Every single time you'd have a veteran uh, singer, normally everyone would always say, yeah, Tina Turner. Yeah, it's got to be that Tina of Turner's. So, yeah, it has to be. And so now I'm assuming to just go on a bandwagon of kind of naming every person that has ever been repetitiously asked to be on the show to be in these masks. So ultimately, yeah, the popcorn, Tina Turner. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? Maybe we're going to be rolling down the river. Moving on. The Dragon ultimately had gone home in this episode. Ultimately, immediately when I heard the clue package, immediately when it starts off, it says that this character had been through several different pieces of costumes, weird and wild, through um, his career. immediately after I heard this artist, I immediately thought Busta Rhymes because it sounded like Busta Rhymes. Because I heard songs like "Break Your Neck" and like some of his kind of like all around um, kind of music. It's been a while since I've heard it, but I immediately always thought of "Break Your Neck," other than a lot of the other stuff. But that ultimately, when hearing it again, I'm like, yeah, that stuff still is great. Stuff still is pretty good, but it's been a while. It's been a while, Buster Rhymes, since I've gone back into your music. So ultimately, I would love to, because it's great. Uh, but anyways, so Buster Rhymes was my thought also because when the clue package said like costumes, I immediately thought of like, well, I remember Buster Rhymes being in the Halloween movie and he uh put on the Michael Myers costume in that movie. As well as him usually in his music videos, usually having like really like one of a kind and unique wardrobes that he would always be putting on like big huge jumpsuits and stuff like that through a lot of his videos. Um, like his like videos were always very obscure and interesting. Um, like I would always like look at his videos and look at like Missy Elliott's as kind of the same um, as far as like heavily visually interesting videos. Um, and yeah, going into that, yeah, like that's kind of my consensus of how I probably just kind of naturally assumed that this kind of was Buster Rhymes. I was kind of getting into close there being a DMX kind of bandwagon going on because, but ultimately, like, this character didn't do certain kind of like what you what like DMX is a certain kind of set of words that he usually throws into a lot of his songs. I guess is a knee jerk thing. So ultimately, like when going to this, I was like immediately, I'm like, yeah, I'm like Buster Rhymes. I'm like, yeah, I remember him wearing the Michael Myers costume, and so I immediately just went into that. Um, and so that's immediately what I thought of. So, ultimately, by the end of this episode, you're going to ultimately see if I was correct or not. Sadly, you may never know until you go into spoilers of the end of this episode, and you will find out. So, for the dragon, a pretty decent performance. Yeah, pretty just kind of just decent. Like for it's like I'm not expecting anybody to do any like operatic performances right now, um, like because it's so early, and plus there might just be a person that only knows like one song, and luckily enough they were eliminated after that because they're like, "Psh, I don't know anything else but this." So yeah, let's move on. All right, so ultimately, we finally now have the Snow Owls, a duet. And really going into here, I was just like, okay, the clues are kind of weird. Because I'm like, okay, it seems like two characters had a talk show, seemingly, because these characters were sitting on a couch and there was something about Christmas, and there was all these other kind of bizarre clues which didn't quite. I was like, what? What is all this? What? And then I came to the consensus after hearing this singing of the "Say Something" song. Luckily, first time like remembering, because I don't remember exactly what the song titles were, but they were pretty good performances. Um, Immediately, I came to again yet another freaking consensus. Um, Vince Gill had numerous times been told that hey, this could be Vince Gill numerous times on the show. There have been numerous times where he had been said for other people, usually especially by Robin Thicke, and so ultimately I'm just like, well, like didn't didn't Vince Gill at some point ultimately have like a talk show? Maybe I don't know, just ballpark guessing or whatever. Um, but yeah, Amy Grant and Vince Gill ultimately is my guess. I'm probably not even saying those names correctly. But yeah, the Robin thickness guess is what I'm going with here of what he guessed on the show. Because immediately as soon as they said that, I was like, well, yeah, like his guessing for this one is really up to par because recently we have Amy Grant, who ultimately is having Christmas albums and stuff like that, and so and immediately when Vince Gill had consistently been like thrown into the hat for a ton of people for this show, like immediately that's who I assumed that this was as well, and immediately. I remember him like doing plenty of really great songs, either um, soloed away, or ultimately, I think at one point he did a song with Reba McEntire, I believe. So yeah, pretty good. Pretty good kind of duet. It'll be interesting to see where they go in the future and do other things. Immediately, I think a lot of people, when they saw the Snow Owls, they were immediately going to think like identical twins, or they were immediately going to think uh, like a brother sister duo, or they were going to think like a of kind of a husband wife kind of thing. So yeah, like everybody was kind of thinking of like these super famous duos and whatever. But I think this pick was really just great. So the Snow Owls were the last to perform tonight. So ultimately, right after this, we now are going to go into spoiling who was that had gone home and unmasked. And then after this, we're going to do a season so far recap with only one episode under the belt. I'm not going to be looking into like, okay, well, who do I think is in Group B or Group C or Group 80, 50, 300 other things. Like, I'm just going to be either kind of content with who I ultimately picked and just kind of just be happy about that, or I'm just going to be saddened and just remorseful and just bellowing away at what I could say would be a thing to just live a life that I knew that I loved at some point, but was ripped away horribly. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this. It really went dark there. I don't know why. So if you don't know if you don't know who the dragon is, or ultimately you don't want to get spoiled right now who this character is, um, you should pause now, or look away, or ultimately save this for another day to when you can see who the dragon is. But I'm going to spoil who the dragon is right now. The dragon ultimately was Busta Rhymes. Ultimately, again, wasn't a big mystery to me, but ultimately, I was gracious enough to see Busta Rhymes. I'm like, God, man, Busta Rhymes is in one still really good shape, and to be like, yeah, he's still like freaking arms to the heavens. But anyways, um, yeah, Busta Rhymes, freaking there was some interesting clues there. Multi platinum artist, Grammy nominated rapper and record producer and actor and all kinds of upper echelons of awards and everything. And just, yeah, Busta Rhymes. Yeah, again, this was kind of a toss up between the giraffe, I think, and the dragon going home. But I think reasonably, I think the giraffe just kind of like the visual of it maybe just won people over, just like, oh, he looks so cute, and so ultimately they just liked the giraffe maybe more than dragon. I don't know. But I think ultimately in the following episodes, if we're just gonna keep notching down these characters, it's going to be very difficult for like the giraffe to keep competing against like a Christine Aguilera era caliber kind of singer, and as well as freaking if Tina Turner is obviously correct and this and that. So yeah, Buster Rhymes, great for him being on the show. I like I said, break your freaking neck. Great song. It's weird. It's weird to say that because ultimately, like the title of it, but yeah, very yeah. I enjoyed his music whenever I got to hear some of it. Um, like I know at some point, like he ended up kind of doing some kind of barrages of like Cavassier kind of songs, and um, like I think there was some like music video where he did like later on where like it had to do with some kind of um like mirror-ish like that. I don't know, I'm not sure. I'm probably talking about that one, but anyways, it was great to see Buster Rhymes. Like, yeah, it's always great to see Buster Rhymes because he always is a very like uh he's a great personality and he's a great freaking rapper. It's awesome. Great. Thumbs up. So now it's about that time to do a seasonal recap. There isn't much to really spoil through any of these other episodes, so I don't have to like do a double five time count. So yeah, let's just go into seasonal recapping so far of a whole one episode. Yeah, there's not much to say. If anything, Robin Thicke and uh, his at home hair, uh, his at home hair, his at home. Is he gonna grow that out to get you alone? Because ultimately, remembering full well, he had really long hair when he was doing the "Get You Alone" um, song. Um, remembering him just riding a bike like all around the street and him just singing, and like it was a very interesting music video for that one because it was like he was just like having like headphones in and he was just biking around, and that was like the entire video. And I was like, well, hey, like I guess he doesn't need like he's mother effing Robin Thicke. He's freaking related to the Growing Pains dad, so it's like he doesn't really need to like do a very excessive video. And like so yeah, but yeah, wonder if he's gonna regrow that long hair out. Who knows? But if anything, it was kind of funny how like Kim Jong had to mention that it's like, oh yeah, like the fifth judge is Robin Thicke's hair. Well, hey, like freaking yeah, he was Robin Thicke was mentioning that he just wants to um, his Masked Singer costume was him wanting to be like a whole thing of hair. Like I think ultimately, I think one of the costumes ends up being that as well. I don't remember which name it was, which ultimately there probably is on here somewhere. The whatchamacallit. Haven't we already called somebody that? Whatchamacallit? Maybe not, I guess, since time heals all wounds. I don't know where I'm going with there. But yeah, so I'm ultimately assuming we're gonna have another week of probably Group A at least. I'm assuming it's probably gonna be like now one of those where they're gonna rotate the groups again. I think what they're just gonna do is keep slowly but surely notching down these teams to eventually go okay. Then we're gonna transition into Group B and C. It's gonna be the same thing all over again. Um, some interesting kind of barrages of kind of costumes this time around. Very much more random in this season than I think in past seasons. It's kind of interesting to have some kind of very goofy costumes going on in this season, but I think really they're trying to break away and ultimately do some really one of a kind like costumes that it doesn't seem too simplistic or too um, cheap, or it really feels like yeah we put a lot of money into this show. Definitely. Um, because there had been some costumes in the past where I was like, yeesh, like this costume looks kind of rough. I was like, yeesh, yeah. But really, when looking at a lot of costumes, I'm sure a lot of the people that were in said costumes were like, dude, I am not going to like sweat to death and like and just be like shrouded in a costume of just sweat and just an anguish because I had performed and whatever. So, like, a lot of people might have had just kind of different standards of like, hey, I'm willing to do the show, but like, I don't want to drown in sweat. So yeah, reasonably pretty good start off of the season. It will be very interesting to ultimately see who eventually the other groups are. There's some very unique characters usually coming towards the end of the show, much more so in the very beginning. Usually in the very beginning, it's probably fairly easy to pick off some characters, especially like it seems like I am going like back to back 2 for 2 on pilot episodes because the last season I had guessed who the robot was and I had guessed correctly. Now, luckily enough for the dragon, I had correctly guessed Buster Rhymes, which ultimately there's only very few voice kind of things that you can kind of figure that out. So it'll be interesting if I can keep this stride going or otherwise fail miserably because I'm expecting that to happen at some point where all of a sudden I am going to be like, oh my god, I started out strong, but then man, did I just go, blah. Like I'm waiting for me to not have any clue who any of these people are and just be in that same boat again of just going like, yeah, I thought it was this person, but no, there's no way. So anyways, I'm gonna have some fun with this season because there are some really fun costume characters going on, especially in this season, compared to others where a lot of times it just kind of felt like okay, you get some weird and odd things going, but it seems like it seems like they really went out of the way to really have some really severely challenging things going on into this season. We have like one costume that would have no clue who this person is, because they're a freaking puppet. Like, I would assume that's like Jeff Dunham then, or some like kind of puppetry like person. Like, I have no clue who that is. So eventually we'll have to figure that out when it comes to it, because I'm assuming that's a person who puppeteers, obviously. Um, that'd be kind of interesting if it was like a Jim Henson kind of person. Maybe we know. But anyways, I think other than that, I think I'm gonna go. I probably took too long going into this, so I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.